Hello and welcome to Unmuted, a solution to finding your voice to realize your dreams. My name is Courtland Warren and I am your host. I have a question for you. If I had a listening device and I could hear the conversation that you're having with yourself when things are not going the way that you would like for them to go, what are the types of things that I would hear? So I'll say that again. If I had a listening device, if I could somehow listen in as you are talking to yourself, that internal conversation, particularly when things are not going the way you want them to go, what are the types of things that I would hear? As it turns out, how you speak to yourself, the conversations that you have with yourself during challenges and adversity is a key to being able to bounce back or have it stay for what seems like forever. Unmuted is my solution to assisting people just like you, brilliant minds, talented individuals with wonderful ideas, businesses, songs that need to be written, businesses that can be started, ideas that simply need to be executed. But along the way, what I have found that happens over the last 20 years in personal development is that people seem to mute themselves because of a belief that I am not ready or it's not yet my time. I see Unmuted as a way to help you discover ways or help you find the ways to realize that potential. So today we talk about resilience and being a more resilient individual, a resilient entrepreneur, a resilient partner, a resilient, for that matter, employee. And resilience is essentially your ability to bounce back from things that make other people quit. Why is it that some seem to be able to handle the toughest of situations with ease and others are knocked down by what seems to be seemingly insignificant situations and circumstances? We'll explore that very specifically. Today's episode of Unmuted is brought to you by Salmaron Financial, owned and operated by Rick Salmaron. And thank you, Rick, for your continued support and encouragement of the work that we do. So a conversation around resilience begins and ends with an understanding of what's in you. So if I'm holding in my hands in one hand a basketball, and in the other hand I'm holding a drinking glass, and I drop them both on this concrete floor. Basketball in one hand, a drinking glass in the other hand, I drop both of them on concrete. What happens? Well, obviously you say, well, the basketball bounces and the drinking glass shatters. How come? Now the novice, you would say, well, duh, right? Well, it's because, one's a basketball and the other's a drinking glass. But if we go deeper than that, we look at it and say, well, it's because of the materials with which it is made. The basketball is made of materials that allow it to be elastic. The drinking glass is made of materials that were heated at about 1700 degrees. And so the pressure applied by the concrete floor causes it to shatter because it was not able to withstand that resistance. So translate to your life. A conversation around being a resilient person begins and ends essentially with remembering what's inside of you. You are made up of the stuff that will allow you to bounce back when oftentimes we respond like a drinking glass, forgetting who we are and forgetting what we're made of. And as a result of that, certain pressures seem to shatter us. So I want you to bring to mind a small child, okay? And when you think about a small child, what are some of the qualities and characteristics that come to mind when you think of this little one? You may think of things like, well, they are persistent, they are honest, they are trusting, they are emotionally they're perfectly self-expressed. A child has that capacity to experience all of the emotions seemingly in 30 minutes, right? Notice how no one teaches a small child how to be honest. If anything, we teach them how to lie. And that lie can start with something as simple as, don't tell mom about this. You get the idea, right? So those qualities and characteristics of a small child, right? My question to you is, are they inherent in some small children or in all small children? Specifically, when we speak of worthy and deserving and innocent and loving, unconditionally loving and trusting and honest, right? Those qualities and characteristics are inherent in all small children, right? That's how they're born into the world, with that capacity to love, to trust, and so forth. Now, what happens to the small child? Right? Well, they grow up, right? Life happens, or life experiences happen. And from those life experiences, they start to believe something else. They start to believe something different. Now, if we look at that as well, okay, if those qualities and characteristics are inherent in all small children, would that not mean that it's inherent in you also, especially considering that you were once a small child? So we established then that, well, okay, if it's true that those qualities and characteristics of loving and trusting and persistent and determined and confident and moving through life without caring what someone else thinks, and the willingness to be honest, if it's inherent in all small children and you were once a small child, then it means that it's also inherent in you. So what happened? If you can recall a time where you were supremely trusting, or you loved unconditionally, and you notice that today you withhold, that the love that the love you once gave, you don't give in the same way that you once did. What happened? Life happened. A life experience happened. And from our life experiences, we began to shape different beliefs, different way, or different perspectives and ways to see the world. Those life experiences, or what I'm going to refer throughout this podcast, those life experiences, or what we'll refer to as the challenges and the adversities that reshape what we believe about ourselves, about other people, about life, and about the world. Does that make sense? I hope we're following here. Now, so we come into the world with these qualities and characteristics inherent in us. Then life happens, or life experience happens, and that belief about ourselves, about other people, about life, or about the world shifts. So why is it that that experience shifts our perspective or belief about ourselves? It is because of our emotional connection to it. Stay with me here, okay? That emotional connection to the event. Because when we experience an event in our lives, we don't just experience the event. There are the feelings and the emotions that come along with the event, because there is something happening at the subconscious level of mind where we are assigning that experience, we are assigning it a belief about us. So you remember, I believe it was in episode 2, or maybe it was episode 1, right, where we explored how a feeling is a conscious awareness of vibration. Feeling is a conscious awareness of vibration, and that's important because if I am aware, if you are aware, if we are aware of what we're feeling, then that informs us of what vibrational frequency we're operating on. And that's important because that then leads to what we'll attract into our lives. Those feelings, the emotions, are what attract into our lives. So show me a person who doesn't allow themselves to feel anything at all, and I'll show you a person who is stuck in their life. Because the feelings are what allow us to move through situations and circumstances. So our emotional connection to an event or experience, okay, the emotional connection to the event or experience is then, because it's happening at the subconscious level of mind, that's where we're forming our belief or our belief structure. Now, to the extent that we don't experience the emotion to the extent that we don't experience the emotion fully, then we are stuck there until we do. It's very important. If we don't fully experience the emotion, if we don't fully experience the event, then we are stuck there until we fully experience it. Because that situation, that life experience is looking to be fully expressed. So to say this differently, If you're a person who has learned or figured out a way to numb yourself to experiences, so, there are no high highs, there are no low lows, you're just kind of numb. Well, note that you're essentially stuck in that place because that emotion is looking to be fully expressed. And when we don't, then we stay there. That's the reason why you could have a 55-year-old man who responds like a 7-year-old. That's not a slight, right? It requires a deeper level of understanding that goes beyond just some trite response. You have a 55-year-old man who responds in argument or in relationship like a 7-year-old, right? And that's because he actually is emotionally, likely because something happened, some experience, some event occurred whereby in that moment, either fight, flight, freeze, in that moment of experience at 7 years old, he shut off the feeling. Or she shut off the feeling. And so though the calendar pages keep turning and the New Year's Eve ball keeps dropping, the years are advancing, but emotionally, we can still be in that place of the traumatic event or experience. Understand this, trauma is not just reserved for tragic events. Okay, you've likely heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When I'm in seminars, I'll ask the question, how many of you have heard of PTSD? And hands will go up. I'll then ask the question, how many of you have heard of PTG, or post-traumatic growth? People gotta look around. Huh? They think that I made it up, some, motivational speakers, little play on words, and it's not. Okay, but understand that post-traumatic stress is not just reserved for those who fight valiantly to protect the country, right? PTSD is not just reserved for military, men and women. Okay, any event can be a traumatic event. The loss of a loved one can be a traumatic event. Losing your job can be a traumatic event. A breakup with someone who was dear and you loved, tremendously, a divorce, right? That can be a traumatic event. Any event or a diagnosis can be a traumatic event. Any experience that you have emotional connection to, and to the degree that you're not able to move beyond that feeling of resentment or emotion, then that for you is traumatic. Now, I say all of that to say, and then I just happen to look at the clock and notice I got to get back on track. This is a program that I used to teach over a 6-week period, and I'm trying to get it into a 30-minute episode on Unmuted. That said, let's get back. So again, you experience the event, whatever that event was, okay, and to the extent that that event takes you out of the essence or the truth of who you are, then for you, that event was a traumatic event. The thing about this understanding is that it's relative. So the exact same thing could happen to another person, and because they don't interpret it the way you interpret it, then it's like no big deal. That's why you can have 2 or more children grow up in the same household, same parents, whatever, same upbringing, and one looks back on it with an experience of tragedy, and another looks and it's not that it wasn't that bad, it wasn't that big a deal, okay, because it's relative. All right. So we say, well, what happened to the small child? What happened? You used to trust and now you don't. You used to love unconditionally and now you withhold. You were once honest and now you're more worried about disappointment. You used to go after your goals. You used to go after your dreams. There was nothing you couldn't do, right? You would set your mind on it and you wouldn't quit until it was done. You were persistent and you were confident and there was no doubt that you could achieve it, just like the small child dreams. So what happened? Life happened, a life experience occurred, and from that life experience, you either gave up, stopped believing, or decided that that dream or goal, that aspiration was bigger than you. Whatever that event was, where you stopped dreaming, where you stopped trusting, where you stopped loving, where you stopped giving, where you stop being truthful, you stop being authentic. Whatever that event was, for you, it was a traumatic event. And you have to re-experience it. You don't got to go back and relive it, okay? But you have to re-experience it. Take yourself back to that moment in time. Allow yourself to feel the emotions that you felt then. And in the moment of experiencing or re-experiencing those emotions, you have the capacity to give yourself a new frame or a new story about what that means. I feel like this may be a little complicated, so I'll give you an example. When I was 4 years old, I can remember the Saturday morning that my dad left home as though it happened just 2 days ago. I was wearing a yellow Tweety Bird t-shirt, long sleeve. I woke up to my parents arguing. That was uncommon. And I get out of bed, I walk in, and my dad is standing in front of my mom. I think it was just basically how my mom kind of moved her head just a little bit and saw me. My dad spins around, he looks at me and says, "Tell your mama to give me my keys." I'm thinking, okay, mama, give daddy his keys. She says, "I will, you just go on back to bed." So I go back to bed, and as I'm headed back to my room, I hear the door slam shut. And when I turn around, my mom's on the couch, she's crying, but I don't see my dad. Now, understand this, my dad was hero, role model, best friend. Everything he wanted to do, everything he did, I wanted to do just like him. So I was that kid that would throw the most incredible fit if my dad left and I didn't get to ride with him. So when I turned around and he's not there, I run to the door. And when I get to the door, I open it. He's just getting into our brown station wagon that we had at the time. And I'm like, wait, daddy, wait. I want to go. He looks up at me and says, "I'll be back to get you." And so I close the door. I run back to my room. I'm taking off that Tweety Bird t-shirt and I'm finding something else to put on. I'm sure it didn't match that day. And my mom walks in. And when she walks in, she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, daddy said he's coming back to pick me up." And just by the way she looked at me, she didn't say anything else. Just by the way she looked at me, I knew that things were going to be different and not necessarily for the positive. It was 20 plus years later in a personal development course. I'm sitting there, I'm listening to how this particular idea around resiliency works. When it dawned on me, he is not coming back to pick me up. Now, granted, at this point, I'm out of college, and so intellectually, of course, I understand he's not coming back to pick me up. But when I looked at my life at that point, everything that I'd done, everything that I was doing was all about how can I be good enough for dad to come back and pick me up like he said he would? How could I be good enough again? How could I be worthy of him liking me again? See, that's the interpretation of a 4-year-old. He doesn't love me. He doesn't like me. I'm not worthy. I did something bad. I'm not a good kid, so forth and so on. Those beliefs, my interpretation of the event is what began to shape my life and decisions. So I moved through my life with a lot of sabotage. I moved through my life. Every time things would go good, I started to pick up some momentum. I find a way to destroy it. Does that make sense? How many of you can relate to that, right? So I started to see some progress, and then I find a way to sabotage it completely. Why? Because progress, success, achieving the goal didn't fit my belief that I wasn't good enough. And so the event I was still emotionally connected to because I had not experienced it completely. Got the idea? All right, so we come into the world, right, with all these beautiful qualities and characteristics inherent in us. Then life happens or life experiences happen. And sometimes those life experiences we have emotional connections to that provide or that unveil a limiting or diminishing belief. Now, with that new belief in place, because our emotions are a conscious awareness of vibration, if I've got that belief and that emotional connection to the event or experience, if that's in place, then I will attract into my life, because of that frequency of vibration that I'm on, I will attract into my life things that are necessary in order for me to be right about or to have evidence of that belief. I know that was a mouthful, but you got to just follow me over time. I tend to, you just follow me over time, and we'll help you break it down. Okay. Again, I want to thank Rick Salmaron of Salmaron Financial for your continued support of Courtland and this particular podcast, Unmuted. All right. So how do we change the conversation? How do we change the conversation? How do we deal more effectively with adversity and challenge? How is it that we can bounce back faster from things that make other people quit? Well, as it turns out, your explanatory style, right, is the key to you being resilient. So that's why we titled this episode That Explains It, because how you explain to yourself the challenge or adversity is the key to bouncing back faster from things that make other people quit. Your explanatory style, this is by Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the leading authorities on resilience, speaks to, and I'll give you two practical and tangible things that you can use to be more resilient, okay? So the one is what we refer to as simply the 3 Ps. What we know about resilient people and their explanatory style, just breaking down the word explanatory, explain, like how do you explain what happened? Well, those conversations that you're having with yourself, they produce emotions and feelings, which produce a frequency of vibration that attracts to you more of whatever is consistent with that belief. So the 3 Ps are one way that you can be more resilient depending on how you view these 3 ideals. Number 1, highly resilient people don't take things personal. Personal, that's your first P. Low resiliency are people who tend to take things personally. So when something happens, when a challenge comes, when adversity strikes, they go to the place of, well, what is it about me such that this bad thing is happening? They have a belief that there's some karmic debt that they have not paid, and therefore, their higher power or spirit being or whatever has it out for them. And now I'm being punished for stealing bubble gum when I was 2 or when I was 6 years old. That is not how karma works, by the way. But highly resilient people, they don't take challenge and adversity personally because they recognize that adversity visits everyone. No one gets exonerated from the struggle. You cannot set your life up in such a way that there are not difficult times. I remember asking my parents how to do that. I remember my youngest son, Sterling, asking me, well, Dad, how can I just go ahead and get all the hard stuff out of the way now? Right? In our naivete, there is this view that we can somehow move through life without challenge or adversity. And a lot of times what people choose is to do nothing. Well, if I don't take the risk, then I can't experience the failure. If I don't move in my life, then nothing will hit me, right? And it is an attempt to avoid challenge, and it is not how it works. So since adversity is going to visit everybody, then understand it as such and don't take it personally. The second P is permanence. Permanence is related to the time component. Right? Highly resilient people see adversity and challenge as something that is only temporary. If you're out there right now, you're listening to this, and you're dealing with challenge, you're dealing with adversity, change your internal conversation and understand that this too shall pass. Like there are seasons in nature, there are seasons in our lives. There's the summer, there's the fall, there's the winter, and there's the spring. Everybody gets winter. But in going through winter, if I remember that there will be a spring, then as I go through my winter, I can look for the lessons that enable me to get to the place of life is not happening to me, life is happening for me. Highly resilient people recognize that it's only for a season. It's only for a period of time. It's just a bump in the road. We'll get through it and we'll be looking back on it soon, likely grateful for it unfolding exactly the way that it did. So the first P is personal. Don't take it personal. The second P is permanence. Recognize that it's only a bump in the road. It's only here for a short time. The third P is pervasive. Pervasiveness, speaking to, that capacity of a thing to spread, okay? Highly resilient people, so let me back up. The opposite of it being pervasive is localizing it. So rather than let it spread, you keep it local or specific to that area of impact, okay? So rather than a difficult time or challenging time coming up and you're like, man, the world is falling apart because I had a flat tire, right? Nothing is gonna go right this week because I burnt my toast this morning, right? Highly resilient people recognize that a challenge in one area does not mean that every area is broken. Got the idea? All right. Whereas low resiliency, okay, these individuals tend to allow a flat tire to ruin an entire week. I will often say to groups that I work with, well, it's more likely that you did not have a bad day. You had a bad 15 minutes that you ruminated on for an entire day. So those 3 P's again: personal, permanent, pervasive. How you explain to yourself, your explanatory style as it relates to the 3 P's is a way to ensure that you bounce back faster than other people. Okay. Then there's what's called we got a lot of alphabets today. All right. The alphabets of resilience almost. The other is the A, B, C, D, and E of resilience, where the A is for the adversity, the B is for the belief, the C is for the consequence, D is for dissuasion, and E is for the new enthusiasm or excitement. Okay, author last name Ellis coined this. All right, Albert Ellis, I believe. All right, so the A is for adversity. When we're going through this, right, it's very important to be present for what you're experiencing. Okay, so what is the thing that happened, and be specific about what it is that occurred. Without the story, what are the facts? Without all of the because, just what are you dealing with that's a challenge? That's the A. What's the adversity? And then the B is for the belief. Now, this requires, not everybody is aware of being able to tune in to what belief gets triggered. Those who are people that I get to, work with more specifically, but we'll put that aside. The B is for belief. Whenever adversity or a challenge comes up, it likely triggers a belief that we have about ourselves or about other people. See, I told you. See, that's why I don't trust people right there. See, I knew it. I wasn't good enough. I'm not worthy. The challenge triggers a belief that is connected to an emotion that has not been experienced fully. The belief, okay, now what you have the capacity to do, because you're listening to this podcast, because you subscribe to Unmuted on a weekly basis, you get tools for handling things such as this. And I assure you, most people are unaware of what belief gets triggered when adversity strikes. And as a result of that, they stay in it for a long time. Post-traumatic stress disorder, there's also post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth, you've experienced it, and you've heard people who experienced it when they say things like, well, the best thing that ever happened to me was losing that job. Because I lost that job, my back was against the wall, my kids needed to eat, and so I went out and started my business. And you know what? I likely wouldn't have if that hadn't happened. Best thing that ever happened to me was losing that relationship. Didn't feel like it at the time, but it opened the door for me to find the love of my life. That's post-traumatic growth. You don't just go through the adversity and bounce back to where you were. You go further than you've ever been before. All right. So that belief triggers, and that the adversity triggers a belief. Okay. And what you have the capacity to do, because you follow Unmuted, is you're able to catch that. Okay, and then ask yourself to see what is the consequence. So meaning, if I keep thinking this way, what will happen? Well, because you now know that an emotion is a conscious awareness of vibration, and you recognize what belief has been triggered, it doesn't take a lot of work to just, play that out. Well, if I keep thinking like this, then this unfolds, this unfolds, this unfolds, or just simply, if I keep thinking like this, will I get my dream? So understand the consequence, and it's likely that you'll see that consequence is not one that you want. So then you immediately go to the D. The D is for dissuasion. So now what you must do, again, because you're self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and we work together, you go to the D of dissuasion. And with dissuasion, all you're doing is recalling or identifying a time in your life when you were the opposite of whatever that negative belief is. So if the belief that gets triggered is I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not smart enough, right? Then find a time, identify a time in your life where you were worthy, you did make it happen, you did trust, so forth and so on, right? So that dissuasion is where you're having that internal dialogue that's like, hold on a second. I understand the feeling that just arose, but the truth about me is, okay? The truth about me is, okay? So you got to dissuade that negative belief. When you do that, you move to the E, which is the new enthusiasm or excitement. You will feel yourself, okay, more excited about the possibilities because your vision of the future, your vision of the future is more in alignment with what you've been saying you actually want. Okay, so the A, B, C, D, and E. Adversity triggers belief. Check in with that. What's the consequence? From the consequence, then you dissuade. The dissuasion then leads to the E, which is a new energy. If you will send an email to info@courtlandwarren.com, we'll email you this framework of the A, B, C, D, and E so you can look at it. All right. Hopefully you're not trying to keep notes on this as you're driving and listening to the podcast. Okay. So let's go back. That explains it, right? The title of this episode, that explains it, right? The number one key to you being able to bounce back from things that make other people quit, and to do so quickly, is how you explain to yourself the challenge or adversity that has occurred. We established that you cannot move through life without adversity and challenge. So if adversity is going to visit everybody, what are the tools that you can have in place to deal with it swiftly so that you can get about the business of realizing your dream? Two tools that we explored today are the 3 Ps: personal, permanent, pervasive, and how you explain, right, to yourself those 3 Ps is a incredible predictor of how fast you'll be able to move. And then we also looked at the A, B, C, D, and E of resilience. If you'll apply those tools, practice with them throughout your day, throughout this week, practice with it and notice the energy shift for you. Because I contend that life is not happening to you, life is happening for you. And it's happening for you so that you can be forever moving and greatly expanding. That is the truth. Thank you for listening. This has been Unmuted. My name is Courtland Warren. And again, I want to thank Rick Salmaron of Salmaron Financial for your continued support. We'll see you next week, every Monday, 10 a.m., maybe 10:04 Central Time, all right, where we'll continue to share with you ways to unmute yourself in your own life so that you can have your dreams and the world can benefit from the service and the